Inverted realism in video games is something that you kinda have to think about to actually notice. Rather, maybe it's not the exact phrase I should be using. The evolution of realism in video games, as it relates to the realistic depiction of video games, can pretty much be represented as a chart with two perpendicular lines running through it, where one line goes from high to low and the other one goes from low to high. How so? Well, have you ever tried to climb in through a window in a video game recently? Sit in a chair, put out a torch, wear more than 2 rings, successfully steal the pants off of someone that wasn't asleep and was actually standing on both feet in broad daylight? But the games look awesome now, you gotta admit it. I mean, games now look amazing. The graphical detail in some cases borders on photorealism, mostly because in some cases they actually use scanning technology to, well, photogrammetry as it's called, to actually scan things from real life and put them in a game. But they don't behave like in a game, and I don't mean that they're already recorded with a certain lighting on them and then they have to add effects to them to simulate other types of lighting, and sometimes it doesn't really work, though the vanishing of Ethan Carter still looks great. I mean, they don't behave like their real-world counterparts. But at a certain point in time, they did. That's what I mean by inverted realism. Graphics start to look realistic, but the games, the game worlds, the laws that govern games become increasingly more abstract and more detached from reality. I've been trying to determine exactly when this actually started to happen. At first I would have said that, oh, it was when they made the jump to 3D, because anything 3D, anything that actually requires you to make a model, anything that requires a representation in more complicated terms than a simple drawing or simple text, yeah, that's not gonna have the same level of realism in terms of interaction, in terms of physical reaction to something that you could just program out in 2D and not really have a realistic graphical representation for it. But Ultima Underworld was kind of 3D. Not completely 3D, I mean, it still used some 2D assets, but it was among the most realistic games ever made for its time. That was a game where your character, even though you sort of resemble a floating camera, as most characters they are, you had physics. If you jumped and hit a wall, if you slammed right into a wall, you would bounce off it because you had inertia. You had sort of the inkling that, yeah, this game was based on technology built for a flight sim. It was made to respect physics, and it's not just the physics that were realistic. The interaction with the world made sense on a logical level. Things worked within the limitation of the time as you would expect them to. You could ram down a door if you felt like it, if you had enough strength or strong enough weapons. You could interact with characters in non-hostile ways, with most of them. You know, there were some assholes in the goblin camp, and some lizardmen were insane, and well, there's demons and monsters, oh my, and bandits, and that really bad evil knight. But for the most part, it was made to simulate a world, or a dungeon. At least the level of believability within the game exceeds anything you will ever see in an Elder Scrolls game. Okay, so the culprit isn't Ultima Underworld, but surely it still was 3D games that were responsible. I mean, what else could it have been? And then you start to think, Quake had 3D graphics, and yet it had more realism than Doom, mostly because it had physics and used physics everywhere it could. That's how you got rocket jumping, that's how you got bullet dodging, because bullets were actually real. It was an evolution in realism in terms of graphics and in terms of the actual behavior of the world. And if you jump forward in time even more, well, you have stuff like Metal Gear Solid 2 that had an absolutely bonkers attention to detail. That game had ice cubes that melted in real time. Okay, so then why do we have games that look great nowadays, but behave sort of like Atari 2600 games in terms of their actual interaction with the world, their actual depiction of the functionality of the world. And I think I know the reason. No one cares. Literally, no one cares. So yeah, the fact that the ice cubes and Metal Gear Solid 2 melted, that was an amazing thing. The fact that your character started to go slowly, on tippy toes, when going by a sleeping enemy soldier, that was superb attention to detail. The fact that the roaches in Half-Life reacted to light and food, that was an amazing thing. But do you actually care about it? And the answer is no. A lot of people just don't care or don't notice this. And it's because we stopped caring, we stopped noticing, and we're just wowed by the fact that, oh my god, I can jump now in 3D and I can actually see my feet. Sometimes I can see my feet. I can see down at least. That was enough realism for people. That was enough that developers just said, you know, let's not spend an extra year to make this game world interactable to the point where you can bake a pie and then launch it at someone's face, and instead focus half a year on making that texture look amazing, put some god rays up there, crank up the shaders, and put in some fog and some bloom. And bam, sold. Game of the year. But this has led to a considerable decrease in the believability of games to certain ludicrous points, where you don't just have the constant effect of the ludonarrative distance that I probably talked about in a different show, maybe in English, I don't actually remember right, I think I did an English version, but you also have the distance between a game and how its world is supposed to function. For example, you find a couch in Fallout 4 inside a locked room, and because you can interact with it through the window, you sit on it through the window and now you're in the locked room. Otherwise, you didn't have the ability to actually enter through the window. Even though it was big enough, even though you could have climbed through it, you had no option. Again, this is something probably people don't care about, but windows in video games have gotten the absolute shaft in the last couple of decades. You could use them in Arcanum, which is again a game with a really high degree of realism to its world, a real authenticity and believability to its environment. But you can't do it in a game built with technology that makes Arcanum look like it's basically a MUD, because it did have multiplayer. And yet, it's easier to do these things as a MUD, or as a text adventure, because you can just mix and match the verbs and the words and the nouns and the everything, and not actually have to draw animations, not actually have to build objects, and actually have to depict all the states possible of every object, of every interaction, of everything in the world. And at a certain level, that does absolutely make me sad, because we now have processing power in our computers, in our GPUs, to dwarf everything that was a decade ago combined. And yet we can't use the compute power to do simulations of that world, of its environment, of its people. If Minecraft had not become the biggest game ever, or at least one of the biggest games ever, we would probably not have pretty much any sort of advanced interaction in modern games. In Fallout 4 you can make systems that interact with each other. You know, you have your conveyor belts or something, or you have power that you can use to power devices and stuff. That's because of Minecraft. That's not because Bethesda thought, you know what, we should add back some realism to this series. No, it's because of Minecraft. It's not because the basis of Fallout wasn't Wasteland, which for its time had a superb degree of realism in the way you interacted with the world. No, it's because Minecraft was popular and they're trying to imitate that kind of gameplay. And hey, I'm fine that they're actually doing this, but they're not focusing on doing everything, or at least not focused on making the world itself believable, just on adding a component to it that functions at a deeper level than just looking nice. And I don't just want to rag on Fallout 4, because every game now is doing this. Every game has been doing this for ages. Even Metal Gear Solid 5, which is still a game that tries in certain ways to be a bit more realistic, pales in comparison to Metal Gear Solid 2, or 3 for that matter. I mean, in 3 you had a boss that would die of old age, because he was an old man if you fought him and the fight went on way too long. And I mean way too long. Yeah, it's a bit of an Easter egg, but still, it adds a sense of believability to that world. And believability is important because if you don't suspend your disbelief, if you don't enter the game world and think to yourself, this is a place that exists to which I am transported to mentally, then you're stuck realizing that you're in front of a computer or in front of a TV and you're pushing buttons while people around you are looking, wondering, what are you doing? And you're just standing there pushing buttons for an hour and not achieving anything. What's the deal? A lack of realism in the world mechanics, in the world interaction, in the character interaction, in the character presentation, the world, everything diminishes that suspension of disbelief. Thankfully, there have been ways to compensate for this. Story is a big aspect. Making stories that are believable, stories that are compelling, with characters that you actually care about, that can help alleviate a lot of the fact that you're armed with a rocket launcher but can't get past a wooden door and you have to find the key on the other side of the level. But story also has the problem that sometimes it's written by idiots and makes no sense, and when that goes, when the thread is cut, everything else comes crashing down. And we all hate Mass Effect now, don't we? Yeah, we all knew that most of its mechanics, most of its world interaction was absolute bullcrap, but the story kept us going and the graphics kept us going. We lost both! No story and the graphics, oh my god! Oh, those animations, oh, those moments of sheer terror sometimes. Yeah, that was a fun time to be on the internet when all those GIFs came out. So what's the fix for this? Well, the fix for this would be bigger game budgets so that games will have better interaction with the world, more believable worlds, and, well, longer development times. Which is why something like Star Citizen, that went into absolute anal detail with the simplest animations, takes forever to make and costs quite a lot of money. More money than the game would have gotten just through sheer sales at this point. So pretty much the only way we can get a game with a really good level of interaction with a believable world, both physically, logically, and graphically, is if we spend ourselves a buttload of cash to fund it, because the vast majority of people that buy games don't care. If they did, Call of Duty would have stopped selling millions, about 5 years ago, and GTA would not be as highly rated as it is today. Well, GTA 5 I mean. Alternatively, we could go back to simpler graphics, to Minecraft style graphics, to 2D graphics, and have as much realism as the people making games care to put into the game. Will that be enough? Well, it won't for some people, but it will for others. So what do you folks think about this? Have you noticed the same kind of decrease in interactive realism with the world, with its behavior? Are you bothered by it? Do you think that putting everything graphics makes up for it? Please leave a comment with your opinion. Goodbye.